I've been a mall security guard for about 4 years when I first met a dude called Craig. Guarding was something that I fell into around 2009 when the job market went and pooped its pants. The pay was okay, I didn't mind working nights, and some of the store clerks used to work us into their 20% employee discount, which was awesome. All my coworkers were pretty laid back too, including the boss. They were just regular guys bringing home a paycheck who didn't go looking for any trouble. But then Craig got hired, and right away, we all knew that he was different. Craig was a short, balding dude with glasses who was either at the end of his 30s or the beginning of his 40s. And word had it that he'd been a security guard ever since he dropped out of high school, and that meant for a while. But you'd never have guessed it from just looking at the guy. He was shy, quiet, and didn't strike me as someone who could handle himself if things got physical. But our boss said that he'd gotten amazing reviews from his references and hadn't taken a sick day in almost 6 years straight. Now, I guess you can't train that kind of a reliability into someone, and you gotta snatch it up where you can find it. So Craig got the job, and it wasn't long before I was working shifts with him. Now, including those in the parking lot, the mall had like 20-something security cameras, meaning a lot of our job was spent sitting in front of a giant bank of screens while watching for shoplifters and car thieves. In the daytime, we were the eyes in the sky, and definitely much more of a reactive force than a proactive one. Night shifts were a different story altogether, but I'll get to that later. So one day, me and Craig are sitting in front of the screens. We can access each individual camera feed from the monitor on our computers, which we use to clip and store footage should we need to. But for the most part, we don't do that unless we've got a good reason to. So when I noticed how Craig was watching this one store without a break, I got kind of curious. When I noticed that he was watching the store that sold clothes and toys for the under fives, I asked if he'd spotted something suspicious. Now, it's kind of sad, but that store was one of the biggest shoplifting spots in the whole mall. I guess the junkies figured out that formula and baby clothes sold fast over at the Hundreds block, so it became a real problem after a while. But then when I asked him, Craig switched over to the camera feed of another store and sort of said something like, "Oh, never mind. It was nothing." Now, I didn't pay it much mind at the time. I did the same thing myself from time to time, but then that same shift, about an hour before clock-out time, I caught him doing it again. And that time, he just straight up denied it. Now, I said something like, "Watching the baby store again, huh?" And then he just sort of flicked over to another store again, saying, "What? No." Now, I somehow got into my head that he had some crush on the girl who worked there, and in all fairness, she was cute, so it did track. I also thought that I had a little theory confirmed when I teased him with the prospect, and he turned as red as a stop sign. Now, I said, "You are into her, aren't you? You gonna ask her out? Come on, do it, dude. Don't be a wuss." He didn't get mad or anything. He just told me to stop while trying to keep a grin off his face. I left him alone, but not enough being like, turns out you're human after all. You're alright, kid." I clocked out maybe an hour or two later, and Craig grinned as I said, "Hey, don't let anyone else catch you crushing on the baby store girl again. They'll think you're stalking her." Over the next month or so, I was on a sort of string of night shifts watching the mall overnight, and 2 of those shifts were spent with Craig. I didn't see him as creepy robot anymore, just a quiet guy who focused on what was in front of him. But I did give him hell about not asking the baby store girl out yet. I told him to live a little, because the worst she could say is no. It's not even like he had to go anywhere near the store during daylight hours either, not unless it was an emergency. But still, all he did was grin and tell me to just buzz off. Now, night shifts were different to days in that we actively patrolled the mall complex once every half hour. Now, one guy would leave the office and take a walk around, while the other stayed behind to watch his back from the screen bank. We wouldn't always keep our eyes glued to the screens, not unless the walker called on the radio. So as Craig was walking around the mall from the 2:30 a.m. patrol, I wasn't paying attention to what he was doing. And not until I happened to look up and see that one of the store's shutters had been partially opened. Now, right away, I radioed over to Craig saying, "Dude, one of the stores is unlocked." And then I had this weird sort of like twin moment of realization as two thoughts hit me at once. Craig wasn't answering his radio, and the store that was open was the baby clothes store. Now right away I'm thinking, uh-oh, Craig's in the baby store, mainly because we were not allowed to just walk into the stores after closing time, not unless something serious is going down. And since Craig was so reliable, I figured that there's no way that he'd be risking his job like that unless there was something wrong. So I grabbed my keys, and off I went to the baby clothes store. Now a few minutes later, I'm ducking under the half-raised shutter, yelling out, "Craig, you in here, buddy?" And immediately he responds, "Yeah, I'm here," and steps out from behind one of the displays. He almost scared the crap out of me, and then I asked what the hell he was doing, and he told me he thought he heard something from inside the store. Now I say, "Dude, why didn't you hit me up on the radio? That's why I'm here." As in, why I was sitting at the screen bank. Now he hears something, he calls it in, and I can see past the shutters and into the store with nothing but a swivel on my chair. So as soon as he said it, I knew his excuse was nonsense, and I reminded him of what he was doing might actually get his butt fired. And it was like dealing with some dumb newbie. Only Craig was not some dumb newbie. He knew the job, and he was pretty good at it, so it made exactly zero sense to me why he was acting the way he was. And so the next night, Craig kind of thanks me for, I don't know, caring about him, I guess. And he thanked me for not telling on him, and he also thanked me for getting him out of that store, which was weird because it was almost like the way an alcoholic might thank you for stopping him from drinking. And I guess that didn't ring the alarm bells that it should have, because at the time I just wanted to know what he was doing in the baby store so late. And that's when he broke eye contact and said something sort of like, I'm gonna be a father. And then right as I'm about to congratulate him, he added, "And I'm scared." I told him something along the lines of, "It's okay to be scared, but I'm sure you'll be fine." But I didn't mean it. Not because I'm the kind to offer empty platitudes, but because I didn't believe him. I'm not saying that I have a particularly advanced bullcrap detector or anything like that. I just don't care how quiet a guy is. If his wife or girlfriend is pregnant, he complains to his buddies at work about it. Even if Craig wasn't the type to complain about it, I didn't buy him not bringing it up before that moment when I confronted him about that store. And I didn't all the way confront him, as in like I didn't call him out on complaining that he was going to be a dad. I just knew that from then on, that he was hiding something, or at least he was maybe hiding something. It was just enough to affect my opinion of him until I knew what that thing was, and when I found out, it was almost like a bomb going off. Craig acted nice and normal for the rest of the time we worked together. I didn't catch him staring at stores, and I didn't catch him in any stores after hours either. He was just Craig. Quiet, weird Craig who lied about having a pregnant baby mama because the next time I asked about it, he totally responded to me saying, "Huh? Oh, yeah, she's fine," when I asked about her. Now, I thought it was weird as hell to lie about something like that, and I hoped that the real reason wasn't like sinister or anything. But that, as it turned out, was nothing but wishful thinking. And on a day when I had to do night shift with Craig, a friend of mine sent a message to the Facebook group chat we shared. Now, the first notification read something like, "Chris sent a video," and then the rest were him sending things like, "Oh my god, LMAO, check out this loser freak." And he used to send tons of stuff like that to the group chat. Weird videos or memes and all that kind of stuff. And so sometimes they were really funny, and other times they made your skin crawl. In this case, the video was most definitely of the skin-crawling variety. When I opened it, all the camera showed was what looked like a kid's room, and then out of nowhere, a grown man dressed as a baby walked into the shot and then turned towards the camera. He was wearing one of those weird baby hats, the bonnets, and some makeup, and had this almost oversized pacifier in his mouth. So at first I didn't recognize him, but he had to take the pacifier out to speak, and when he did, I suddenly realized what I was looking at. It was Craig, the adult baby now babbling about mommy and having a full die-die, and then pretending to cry, saying, "Wah, wah, wah." I remember closing the video, and then just standing there in my kitchen for a second or two, just not really knowing what to do with myself. Obviously, one of the thoughts going through my head was, that's why Craig was in the goddamn baby store. He obviously couldn't wear any of the clothes there, but knowing why he was interested in them made my skin feel like it wanted to crawl off my bones. But then my other thoughts involved stuff like, was Craig dangerous? Was he some kind of PDF file whose thing was dressing up like a baby? I had no idea, and it's not like I wanted to dedicate any brain power to it either. It made me feel uneasy and very queasy thinking about Craig all dressed up like that, but it made me even queasier thinking that I had to spend 10 hours in a shopping mall with him, completely alone. I ended up calling my buddy Chris, the one who sent the video, to ask where he'd found it and how many people he'd sent it to. He said someone from his job sent it to him and that he'd sent it to just about everyone he knew, with obvious exceptions for family. Now that meant the video was going around town, so it wasn't going to be long until Craig got recognized for being the giant man baby in it. And while a heck of a lot of people were going to laugh their butts off at him, I knew that there would be people that thought he was a predator and would want to hurt him. But was he a predator? Or was he just some harmless weirdo? Now that was the real question, so that night while we were at work, I decided to just ask him about it. It was probably one of the most awkward and creepy exchanges of my entire life, and it took me like 3 hours to work up to it too. I wasn't scared of Craig, at least I wasn't physically intimidated by him, but if I confronted him on what was no doubt a deep, dark secret, what was to stop him from freaking out and pulling a knife on me or something? Even if he didn't and just straight up denied all knowledge, spending the rest of my shift with him was going to be awkward as hell, so it was definitely a period where I thought to myself, just mind your own business and let whatever happens happen. But I couldn't, and in the end, I asked him. The second I said, "Hey Craig, I saw this video today," he turned even redder than I had asked him if he had a crush. Now I cut myself off after the day and just watched his reaction to sort of gauge it, and I swear to God, Craig started sweating right there in front of me. I told him I figured that he knew which video I was talking about, but he didn't move and he didn't say anything. He just sat in his chair, eyes locked on the screen bank, swearing and shaking like he was coming down with some fever. I guess I didn't really know where to go from there. He'd already admitted it silently, but it was an admission all the same. And I don't think I expected him to do anything but deny it till he was blue in the face. And so once I had the admission, I went to what I considered the most important question of all, which was, "Craig, are you a weirdo for kids?" And then, and only then, did I get a reaction. His head spun around and he says, "No, it's not like that, dude. I swear to God, I'm not." It was a very strong reaction and one that had a pinch of outrage to it, and not the kind of please believe me that you get when someone is lying to save their skin. Now, I guess I never truly know for sure, but in the moment, his answer, it rang true and I believed him, but that still left the question of what the hell was he doing making those videos? And I guess it might sound a bit weird, but I kind of backed off on wanting to know why. I mean, I could probably take a shot in the dark and it wouldn't be too far off, but even if I knew, it wouldn't change anything. Craig was weird. Really weird, actually, but as far as I knew, he was harmless, and I actually kind of liked the guy too, so there was that. And then, because I liked him, I knew he didn't deserve what was definitely coming his way, and I told him to quite literally get the hell out of town. And Craig knew it too. He knew that once people saw that video, and knew the guy who made it was a security guard down at the mall, it wasn't just his job he'd be in danger of losing. And so even though his record was clean and I didn't personally believe that he was some kind of diddler, the best thing for him to do was leave town and start over someplace else. And once I was done giving my speech, Craig looked like he was searching for the right words, and then he burst into tears out of nowhere, and he didn't stop crying for a good couple of minutes. Now don't get me wrong, I didn't feel too bad for him. Uploading videos like that was dumb as hell, and it was only a matter of time before someone recognized him. But his dumb mistake had ruined his life, or at least it was going to ruin his life if he didn't find someplace far away to live, and fast. Well, that was the last I saw of Craig. When we clocked out, he thanked me for letting him know that his video was going viral and then told me that I might not see him around much anymore. I told him I was sorry to hear that, but it was for the best. He needed a fresh start someplace else, and he needed to fix whatever needed fixing so he didn't feel the need to put that kind of crap online. Because it was either going to get him hurt, or, this was half the reason I felt very little sympathy for him, I felt like whatever his thing was specifically, it had the potential to turn into something dangerous. Like maybe he was telling the truth when I asked him if he wasn't some kid like her or not, but people change, right? For better and for worse. And a dude who dresses up like a baby and chooses to do so in some skimpy little diaper thing and not like a onesie, that stuff's gotta have the potential to get worse. I don't care what anyone says, and I say that as a father of 2 daughters. Craig was gone by the time everyone realized what he was posting. All our coworkers either got sent the video directly or they got told about it at work. And so Craig's reputation was just about obliterated come the end of the week. Our boss said it was good that he got the hell out of town because he'd have fired his butt if he tried to stick around. And there was a lot of hate towards Craig like that, and I get it. But all I really feel anymore when I think about him is fear. I hope he's doing okay and that he found a good woman or man or whatever and settled down, because one of the alternatives is that he didn't get himself together and he got worse. And then if he gets worse, maybe he'll do something terrible with a kid or a baby. And then it'll kind of be my fault for not taking him around the back of the mall and shooting him when I had the goddamn chance. I've worked in medical science for nearly 20 years now, mostly as a lab technician, but also as a coordinator and principal investigator. And many years ago now, I used to work in a small medical clinic in the greater London area. We mostly ran blood and urine tests, and while we had an x-ray room and a few other things too, it was 95% blood and urine week in and week out. And as you can imagine, we're exceptionally careful when handling samples. I can't imagine many of you have received calls saying, we misplaced that blood you gave us, can you come back and give us some more? And that's because we're really careful with them. And so one day, when one of our nurses came to us saying that he dropped our sample, our first thought was concern, and not for the bloody sample, but for him. Now, I don't want to use his real name because that'll give away which clinic this took place in, so I'll just call him Dave. And when Dave dropped a sample, I was worried that he might not be feeling well. When I asked him what happened, Dave said that the beaker dropped from his grip after he suddenly became lightheaded. So we sent him home for 2 days, then he came back feeling much better. Now, Dave was a great nurse, an asset to the clinic, and God knows we wanted to look after him. So a couple of weeks later, when it happened for a second time, I recommended that he just go to the doctors for a full checkup. Dizzy spells can be a sign of some pretty nasty illnesses, but following a full medical exam, he was told that there was nothing wrong with him. We were relieved, why wouldn't we be? Not to mention, Dave did admit to skipping breakfast on the day of the second spill. So once again, it passed without too much suspicion, and Dave continued to work at the clinic. But then came the day that I walked in on him doing something that I told myself was impossible, and it felt like I was hit by a train. We trusted Dave to be alone with the samples, so it wasn't in the least bit unusual for him to be left alone and uninterrupted for sometimes long periods of time. So when I walked into the containment lab, I caught him by surprise, just as he was lowering a sample beaker of urine from his mouth. I froze. He froze. Then he dropped the beaker to the floor and mumbled something like, I dropped it. But it was too late. I'd seen everything, and there was no unseeing it either. Dave begged me not to tell anyone. He swore that he'd never do it again, and even offered me money to keep quiet. But what else could I do? To say his behavior constituted gross misconduct would be putting it mildly, and we simply couldn't have anyone with such inclinations around the clinic. End of story. As you can imagine, it was quite a big deal, but all the General Medical Council was interested in was keeping it out of the papers, so when Dave just sort of disappeared, it suited everyone just fine. It was the end of our problem, but not the end of his problem because procedure stated that we pass on what we'd learned to the police. Dave had broken laws pertaining to the mishandling of biological materials, which covers everything from blood to stool samples. It was unlikely that he'd be locked up. A first offense would get him a fine and suspended sentence at most, so we were told, but he'd never be able to work in the health service ever again. His life as he knew it was over. But to be fair, he probably should have thought about that before he decided to take a shot of piss right as I walked in. Now anyway, life moves on without Dave, and although we missed his skills and experience, we did not miss the feeling of knowing that there was someone like that working amongst us. I think it was like 6 or 7 weeks, long enough that we'd almost let the whole sorry episode slip from our minds, or at least I personally almost had anyway. And then one day, after driving home from work, a car pulled into my driveway behind me, having followed me home from the clinic to block me in. Now, I knew who it was the moment I saw the car. I'd seen that car almost every day in the clinic's car park for almost 3 years. It was Dave's car, and he had followed me home. He walked down my driveway towards me as I got out of my car, shouting at him to get away from my house before I called the police. Now, I made such a racket that my husband actually came out, and our kids watched from the front window as he walked Dave back up the driveway. He wasn't polite about it either, neither of them were, and Dave only started to back off once my husband had promised to bounce his head off the concrete. We reported him to the police, but since Dave was out on bail, there wasn't much that they could do unless they caught him in the act of actually threatening us. All they could do as it stood was warn him to stay away from me, or his attempts to do so would constitute harassment. But it didn't stop him, and things only got worse. It all culminated with Dave trying to drive me off the road one evening when I was on my way home from work. I knew I was in trouble from the second I looked in my rear view and saw his car in the road behind me. I just didn't think that he was mental enough to try and scare me in such a dangerous situation. I don't think he wanted me dead. Or maybe he did, who knows. But if I think he really wanted to murder me, he could have done it with a knife come closing time at the clinic. However, that didn't make what he did any less frightening because his reckless driving ended up with me careening off the road and into a ditch. I wasn't hurt, not too bad anyway, but I did need to go to the hospital to get checked out just in case. It was a horrible experience, but like many dark clouds, it did have a silver lining. Dave's dangerous driving had been caught on several cameras, meaning he was swiftly arrested and kept on remand before his trial since it was deemed that he was a threat to the public. That new dangerous driving charge meant prison was now on the cards, and although he only got 3 months for all the offenses he racked up, it was still 3 months where we could all feel safe again. He didn't bother coming back to do anything, not to my house or to the clinic. He did 3 months of a 6-month sentence, meaning any other offense would have him recalled to prison. Now, I was appalled at what a light sentence he got at first, but now I actually appreciate how smart it was. 3 months is nothing to sniff at for a first-time lag, and then the prospect of another 3 months in jail was enough to deter Dave from any further threatening interactions. And it's a bloody good thing that he didn't turn up at our house again, because I swear my husband would have done time for murder. Deep within the remote wilderness of Nahanni Park lies a history whispered about more than it is told. Over the years, explorers have vanished without explanation, entire expeditions have ended in silence, and strange discoveries have sparked legends that refuse to fade. Locals speak of an ancient presence hidden in the canyons and forests, something that watches, waits, and does not welcome the curious. Hear the full story over on my true crime channel, Saturn Soul. All links down below. Hey Joel, I'm a comedy writer, and while these days I do okay, I even got my name in the credits of a show on Hulu, that's not always been the case. In the beginning, it was a grind, and trying to transition from being a commis chef to a comedy writer was not the easiest, let's just say that. Now, for example, the first job I ever got that paid me purely for my writing sucked. I was writing skits for a small company whose goal was to create viral videos. Our boss said that he knew a guy who could turn click numbers into ad sales, and with ad sales came some pretty big money. I guess that doesn't sound too bad on the surface, but the content outline the ad guy sent us was just lame. It obviously had to be funny, but he was so scared of offending anyone that he sometimes sucked all the funny out of a skit and doomed it to fail. Now, I don't know exactly how our boss made any money. I guess by keeping the numbers of employees to just me and one other guy, but he kept it going for about a year before he called it a day and quit while he was ahead. It was probably the worst, most boring writing job I ever had, and thankfully, I went on to have a much better experience in the industry. Shout out to my current producer and editor. But ironically, it was in that super boring job that I got one of the weirdest and freakiest stories of my whole life. And that story centers around a guy named Paul. Paul was a very funny guy. He grew up in Quincy, Massachusetts, not too far from me, and although his sense of humor was drier than a bucket of sand, he was easily one of the smartest, funny people I'd ever met. But he also happened to be really, really weird too. He never ever joined me and the boss man for beers after work. Even on his birthday, he just wanted to go straight home to do whatever he did there. And we had next to no idea what that was because he only ever gave monosyllabic replies to any and all questions about his personal life. And the only thing we knew for certain was that he didn't have a girlfriend or wife and that he didn't have any kids either. So what he did alone in that apartment of his was just a complete mystery. Neither me nor my boss chose to probe too much. He was a chill guy and he made our lives way easier by writing very good but very clean skits. Now, I wanted to push him to find a girl or something because it's true that a good sense of humor is a huge aphrodisiac. But like I said, I was his coworker, not his grandma, so I refrained from asking, "Have you found any nice girls, sweetheart?" But then imagine my surprise when I was working in the office one day and I heard a female voice coming from the communal room. I didn't go running to see who it was, I just kind of listened in for a second, sort of like, "Dude, does Paul have a lady friend over?" Now, I stayed put, not wanting to cramp his style and all of that, but I was still quietly thinking, way to go, Paul. At least until I crept closer to my office door and heard the lady's voice a little clearer. And she sounded old. Not really old, but way older than Paul's regular dating range. So when the voices died down and I heard Paul walking back to his office, I went over to ask who the special lady was. Alright, I did kind of tease him just a little as I was saying, "Oh, what's up, Casanova? You got a girl paying you visits at work now, huh? Well, that moves pretty fast, huh?" But instead of shooting me a little grin or even telling me to leave him alone, Paul then says, "I don't know what you're talking about." Now, I thought that was just him making a joke, so I respond, "Oh, hardy har har," all sarcastically before I asked him for real who the chick was. But I quickly realized that when he denied all knowledge of any lady being present, he was very serious. As Paul stared at me with this completely unamused look on his face, I realized something was going on, and the first place my mind went to was cheating. And the only time I'd ever seen anyone straight up deny seeing a woman was when they were cheating, and didn't want me, blabbing about it in front of their girlfriend. But I knew that there could be other reasons too. I mean, maybe the woman was a relative of his or something, passing on some type of bad news, or at least something Paul didn't want me to know about. Either way, I took the hint and just responded, "Alright, my bad, dude. I must have been mistaken." Now, I thought it was strange, but like I said, Paul was an okay guy and I didn't want to make him mad by pushing him on something that he didn't want to be pushed on. But then, it happened for a second time. Paul's office was right next to mine, and although we had our own little workspaces, the boss definitely saved himself a few bucks on space because the walls were paper thin. And so when I took my headphones off, the only thing that kept my concentration really, I suddenly heard the sound of a woman's voice coming from the room next door. Now I'm thinking, damn, Paul's got that lady back in the office again. But seeing as he was weirdly sensitive about it, I pretended not to hear it. And I say pretended, but that didn't stop me from listening in out of curiosity, especially when I realized that it was that same older woman's voice that I'd heard the previous week. And unlike the first time when it sounded like Paul and her were having a friendly exchange, that second time it sounded like they were actually having a little bit of an argument. Now I could hear the woman verbally sort of pecking at him, and then Paul alternated between sounding like he was sorry and sounded like he was defending himself. It actually got pretty heated at one point, but instead of tapping on the wall and telling them to keep it down, I just kept on listening, wondering what in the hell was going on in there. Finally, after maybe 10 to 15 minutes, Paul and his lady went very quiet again, and I figured that it'd be only a matter of seconds before I heard his door open and close and then footsteps walking down the hallway and out of the office. But there was nothing, and after about a half hour of silence, I realized that she was still in the room with him. And then not long after that, my curiosity got the better of me. I thought about an excuse to go visit Paul in his office and then focused on trying not to embarrass him when I opened the door. And what I meant by that is I wanted nothing more than to be like, "I knew it. I knew you had a lady in here, you dirty, rotten scoundrel." But I also knew that he'd be super pissed off if I sort of blew his cover. I kept this sort of iron straight face when I knocked on his door, preparing myself to just sort of say, "Oh, hey, how's it going?" to his lady friend. But after I knocked and he yelled, "Enter," I walked into a room containing Paul, and only Paul. And at that point, I felt like I was losing my freaking mind. I was 110% certain that I just heard a woman talking in his office, and I was also certain that whoever it was hadn't left either, because like I said, these were paper-thin walls. And so when I say, "I'm pretty sure I just heard a woman in here," I refuse to take Paul's no for an answer. And then I say, "Dude, why are you lying?" And it wasn't like I was going to snitch on him to the boss, and even if I did, there was really nothing that said that we couldn't have visitors in the office. And so it made no sense why he'd try and pull the wool over my eyes like that and just lie to me. Now, Paul claimed that he wasn't lying, and I felt like banging my head against the wall or sort of talking to one would be more productive than talking to Paul, because what the hell's going on? We went back and forth like that for a while, with me trying to explain how it wasn't a bad thing that he had a lady over, or at least how he didn't need to lie to me about it. And then after a few minutes of that, Paul exploded. In the 6 or 7 months that we'd worked together, I'd never seen him so angry. He went completely red in the face, stood up from his chair, and yelled at me to get the hell out of his office. I tried to reason with him, but all he was saying was, "Now, Kurt, get the hell out." It honestly seemed like if I didn't, he was going to actually punch me, so I quit while I was ahead and walked out of his office. We didn't speak for a couple of hours, not till the end of the day, and when we did, I apologized for pushing on something he clearly didn't want pushed on. Paul didn't accept my apology, and instead just looked irritated that I'd even brought it up. But since I'd gotten it out there, I'd just sort of backed off and then told him that I'd see him the following morning. I mentioned the whole thing to my boss after work over beers, and we both agreed that Paul was acting strange. But the strangest part by far was when we realized that his lady friend had to have been hiding in the room when I knocked on the door to check on him. If I hadn't heard her leave, then where else could she be? Hell, I might even have interrupted them getting a little handsy or something, and whoever his lady friend was, she was probably just shy. But even after I left his office, I didn't hear anyone leaving, so if she did leave, it was on her tippy toes, not wanting to attract my attention. Like I said, we both agreed that something weird was going on, and that maybe Paul's girlfriend was like a heck of a lot older, and that's why he was embarrassed. But we were way, way off, and given 1,000 guesses, I don't think either of us would have gotten close to what was really going on. And so the next morning, I was driving to work and my usual route took me across the bridge. But then that morning, the bridge was closed. I turned around and had to take an alternate route, which meant that I was about 15 minutes late. But when I arrived at the office, Paul had yet to show up also. Now, I told my boss I was sorry for being late, and I genuinely was, because he was an awesome guy despite how bad the job sucked. But then he says, "Looks like everyone's a little delayed this morning," and then told me about Paul. I figured that he probably took the same route I did, meaning the same bridge, so it was probably one of those who got stuck in the very same jam I escaped by turning around. Now, we both figured that he'd showed up within the hour or maybe a little longer if the jam was as bad as I thought it was. But I think only like 10 or 15 minutes went by before my boss knocked on my office door with some news. Now, the bridge was down because somebody went nuts that morning. They stopped their car in the middle of the bridge, got out, and started yelling at the people behind him. The cops had to come along and haul the guy off, most probably to the psych ward, seeing how crazy he was acting. But now, since the guy was gone and his car had been moved, traffic was flowing again and Paul could be showing up at any minute. But he didn't. In fact, he didn't show up at all. Our boss called his cell phone a bunch of times, and we didn't worry at first when he didn't pick up, but then, as time went on, we did start to worry. He didn't show up the next day either. He wasn't answering his home phone or his cell phone, and with someone having gone nuts on the bridge only to be dragged away by the cops, we started to wonder if the two things might be connected. I guess to anyone reading this, it's pretty obvious what happened by now. But denial is a powerful thing, and we didn't fully entertain the idea until weeks later when we finally got the truth. As I said, a lot of you probably worked out that it was Paul that went crazy on that bridge that day. And while that's all terrible and very unfortunate, and I legitimately hope that he's doing much better now, that wasn't the really messed up part of it. Our boss ended up meeting a guy who will remain anonymous because he could probably still get into trouble for this, and he was one of the people that had dealt with Paul after he was taken to a hospital. Like a psychiatric hospital too, not a regular one. Obviously, he had a complete nervous breakdown there on the bridge, and after blocking traffic, I figured he was just yelling F you to the people behind him. But he wasn't. He was begging them to call the cops, and when they arrived, they were the first to hear something he ended up telling a lot of people over at that hospital. He needed to be taken to jail and fast because he just murdered his own mom and then eaten her. Now, before you all freak out completely, he hadn't really eaten her. He hadn't even hurt her either, and he couldn't because she'd been dead for years by that point. But the cops didn't know that, not right away. So when he swore on all that was holy that he'd just cooked his mom's head in the oven, the cops went over to his place to see if he was telling the truth. It turns out Paul had roasted and eaten a head. It was just a pig's head that he'd gotten from someplace, and he'd left it so intact after only eating a little that the cops didn't even need to send off a sample or anything. They could see that it was a pig just with the naked eye. The cops went back and told Paul's doctors, who put it to him that the whole thing was just in his head. Paul went nuts, called the doctor a liar, and then lunged across the table at him. And after that, he was officially deemed a ward of the state and was doomed to remain in that hospital till he showed significant signs of improvement. I had a cousin who was forced into mandatory psych care, and you do not get out of that system easily. They let murderers out of prison easier than they let crazy people out of hospitals, and that includes people that haven't hurt a fly. So that's the other part of this that I find really creepy. How a guy as normal, or at least seemingly normal as Paul, managed to go so crazy that he's now an indefinite resident of some state hospital. And Paul, if you somehow ever hear this, I miss you, buddy, and I hope you're doing better. Hey Joel, my name's Les, and I'm from the northeast of the United Kingdom, and my daughter and son-in-law are big fans of your podcast. They listen in the car a lot, and you remind me a lot of an old radio program we had over here called Fear on 4, only an American version. I loved listening to that on the wireless when I was just a lad, and those were all ghost stories, and I was informed by my daughter that yours are all submissions from listeners. Well, with that in mind, here's one from my days as a hotel concierge that I've never forgotten, and one I never will forget either. It was the late 90s and just coming up to the summer holidays when the hotel I was working at lost a number of important staff. We lost our receptionist to maternity leave. Not that we weren't happy for her, but her absence was a big loss because she was phenomenal at her job. And then on top of that, we lost two of our most experienced members of the service team, one of which came at very short notice due to an undiagnosed heart condition. Now, at a big hotel chain, that wouldn't have been a problem. But as a small boutique hotel that employed only about a dozen forward-facing staff, their loss was very sorely felt. I knew we needed staff and badly, but we all trusted the management to make the right hiring choices. But when they hired a lad called Brian, they made a serious error of judgment. And from the moment I met him, I could tell that there was something not right about him. Call it a hunch or call it many years of experience, but there was something off about him from the moment we first spoke. First impressions aren't always perfect, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt for about a week, and then I saw the way he looked at some of our female guests, especially the younger ones. It's not unusual to see a baggage boy's eyes wander when a beautiful lady is staying in the hotel. We used to get some very well-off people staying with us, and rich men have beautiful wives. But when I saw the same look in Brian's eyes over a guest's 11-year-old daughter, I knew it was a very bad omen indeed. And I tried talking to the management about it because we could still get rid of Brian while he was still in his probationary period. But management said it wasn't that simple. They had the right to let him go at any time, but they still needed a solid reason, something that would look good on a report so Brian couldn't find a way to accuse us of discrimination. They had the right to let him go at any time, but they still needed a solid reason, something that would look good on reports so Brian couldn't find a way to accuse us of discrimination. They told me to keep an eye on him and that if a customer made a complaint for any reason, they'd give Brian the chop. Now, I tried to keep my eyes peeled and a reason before anything happened, but in the end, the person that needed protecting was Brian. Now, one evening in mid-October, just as the nights were starting to get dark early, Brian was on shift and with us until 11 p.m. His shift passed without incident, and then he went off to the staff room to clock out and change his shoes. He always left his dress shoes in the staff room and commuted in his trainers. His dress shoes smelled awful. And this usually involved him retiring to the staff room for no more than a few minutes before he'd reappear in the lobby and leave through the front doors. But on this occasion, he didn't reappear in the lobby. It wasn't a crime to hang around in the staff room following a shift, but after maybe 10 to 15 minutes of Brian not reappearing, I started to wonder what he was up to. A couple of more minutes went by and I started to get this feeling in the pit of my stomach that got worse and worse. I couldn't shake the feeling that Brian was up to something. I just didn't know what. So I told the night receptionist that I was going to check on him. But then no sooner had I stepped toward the hallway leading to the stairs that Brian suddenly appeared, staggering in the opposite direction, and he had blood streaming down his front. All of my contempt for the lad suddenly evaporated. He looked terrified, with his eyes having become these big white and brown circles that just screamed danger. And as I got closer, I realized that his nose had been severely broken, so much so that it looked like it had been smeared across his face almost completely flat. And he also appeared very dizzy, like he could barely stand, and as I got closer, he just began muttering, "Help me. Please help me, Les." Now, I got him into the back office behind the reception area, and then after handing him a load of blue roll to stop the bleeding, I told the night receptionist, who was definitely in a panic by this stage, to phone 999 and ask for both the police and the ambulance service. Now, I kept asking Brian what had happened because I obviously needed to establish if the rest of us, guests included, were in any danger. But the only thing Brian said that made any sense was, "Don't let him get me. Please don't let him kill me." I'm asking, who, Brian? Who attacked you? Where did it happen? But he wouldn't say. He would just groan with that big wad of blue roll clamped over his mouth, and it was a few minutes that I was absolutely terrified, convinced some hammer-wielding maniac was about to round the corner and start smashing the place to smithereens. But instead, as I walked back out into the lobby to reassure the night receptionist wasn't alone, a barefoot man in shorts and a t-shirt appeared and shouted, "Where is he?" Now, I'm not daft. I knew this bloke had been the one to give Brian a pasting, and for the briefest of brief moments, I thought that there was a chance that he hadn't deserved it. Brian was a creep. There was no two ways about it, but that didn't rule out him having a very unfortunate encounter with a violent psychopath. But, and as I'm sure many of you have predicted by now, the man in the shorts was not some violent psychopath, and Brian most definitely did deserve to be battered. After he appeared, the angry dad in the shorts, it took a minute of trying to calm him down before he stopped demanding to know where Brian was and started explaining why he was looking for him. So we only had 12 rooms at the hotel because the hotel's mantra was something along the lines of low occupancy, high quality. We had 4 single rooms, 5 doubles, and then rooms 10, 11, and 12 were suites, or what we called our family rooms. These consisted of a larger adult's room, complete with television, lounge, and small dining area, and then a smaller kid's bedroom. And due to fire safety regulations, both rooms could be accessed from the first floor hallway. That's the second floor to Yanks, meaning we had room 12, but then room 12B, which was the kids' room. And so right before he got into bed, the angry dad decided to check in on his 2 primary school-aged daughters who were asleep in 11B. But then who does he see standing there in almost perfect dark, watching his 2 little girls as they slept? Brian. And as he can imagine, Brian had no good reason whatsoever for being in the girls' room. And once that was established, and the girl's dad realized that he wasn't there in any professional capacity, he went ballistic, as any dad would, I suppose. But what happened next was just a shambles. After talking the angry dad down from wanting to quite literally murder young Brian, he demanded we call the police. But then after reviewing the footage from the corridor security system, the police arrested the dad on suspicion of assault and GHB. Brian had done enough to be immediately sacked, but he hadn't done anything worthy of being arrested, so we had this truly bizarre situation where the aggravated party was put into handcuffs while the creep who had been planning on doing God knows what to his daughters was treated like the victim. And I suppose that's just how the law works. One party had done nothing but stand in a hotel room with some sleeping girls in it, and the other had inflicted serious bodily harm, and I do mean serious because there's no way Brian's nose was ever the same shape again. And I suppose to the cops it was an open and shut case, especially once they reviewed the footage and saw the dad kicking 7 shades of crap out of Brian. Now, I don't know what happened to him, and I hope he didn't have to do any time for it. Brian, on the other hand, I know exactly what happened to him. We got rid of him, not a moment too soon either, and it was good riddance to bad rubbish. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and there are super fun live streams every Sunday and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over at my email, letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, and click that big join button to hear about the extra perks for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories and big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. I also have a true crime channel called Saturn Soul, and all links are down in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, YouTube Recap is out, and if you aren't in my top 5%, I'm going to find you.